Stepp show. It's not the Stepp show. This is my favorite show because it's Josh's show. He does what he wants to do. He says what he wants to say. With a laugh and a smile, he'll brighten up your day. This is the Josh Stepp show. That's the Stepp show. Sit back and enjoy the ride on the Stepp show tonight.
PSYOPs, short for psychological operations, involves the use of tactics to influence emotions, perceptions, and behavior. This series explores the diverse applications of psychological influence, from media strategies to social interactions. There's no specific order or structured episodes. Each piece stands on its own, offering unique insights into the power of persuasion. These were originally made as part of my personal Substack, which you can find under the name Josh Stepp, and I've linked to as well if you care to follow. But I intend to cross-post all of these here on Intrusions InDepth as well, because there's usually some aspect of cybersecurity or information security to them as well, at least the ones I read. Furthermore, I want to approach this from a conversational standpoint, and not all frameworks like those found in GTAs, the graphical training aids commonly utilized in like military operations for these types of activities. While useful for planning operations, I find the frameworks for analysis of other campaigns can kind of turn into a choose-your-own-adventure story of opinions rather than facts. Which I guess isn't a bad thing, as even most historians concede that history itself is mostly opinion based on a few facts. Oftentimes it's the best story that kind of wins through. And I think it was like Ed Barnhart, an archaeologist and explorer specializing in ancient civilizations of the Americas, that made this observation that if he came to Las Vegas a certain time after the civilization had collapsed, he would assume that there was Egyptian influence, Greek influence, Persian influence, etc., etc. Something along those lines. The point being that they have to form opinions based off of what they see and may not have the full context of what was going on. That this was a casino where people gambled. Maybe gambling isn't a societal norm in the future. I think we all get the point here. Like, what if people 2,000 years from now found the Hunger Games instead of the Bible and followed that? Well, they would think we were pretty ruthless to kids, and hopefully they wouldn't adopt that practice. Moving on. The inspiration for this episode was a 60 Minutes interview that aired between two alleged retired Mossad agents who had involvement with pager and walkie-talkie attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. As I watched other people's analysis of this topic, specifically the sophistication of the campaign carried out by the group, I felt like the kind of second or third order messaging was being missed, which is the angle I wanted to bring up today. But throughout this episode, there's a few elephants in the room that I need to address. I'll start with the first one, in that I'm not trying to discuss the morality of any side in this conflict. It's not my purpose here and will derail the conversation I really want to have. So please, table whatever side you support in this conflict and the emotions that come with it, and look at this through the lens of data points, please. Also, I think this is a good time to state any manuals, materials mentioned in this episode, or sourcing. This is all public. You can buy older Army manuals for PSYOPs online, or just look at the PDFs. There's no super secret insider information here. Sorry, folks. Well, I guess this is a good time to run this as well.
The information presented in this show is sourced from publicly available materials and does not contain any classified or proprietary content. The views and opinions expressed are those of the host and guests alone and do not reflect the official policy or position of their employers or any affiliated organizations. Enjoy the show.
Amidst the vibrant streets of Beirut, through the bustling crowds, Hezbollah, affectionately known as the Party of God, has woven itself deeply into the very fabric of Lebanese culture. Since its inception in the early 1980s, this group has been a formidable force, backed by Iran, combining the roles of militant, political party, and social welfare provider. As declared in its 1985 manifesto, one of Hezbollah's primary goals is the destruction of Israel. However, over its almost 40-year existence, the group has earned its place amongst the most influential non-state actors in the region. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean in the silent halls of Tel Aviv, Mossad, Israel's national intelligence agency, was known for its cloak and dagger operations, and still is. Mossad has had multiple mottos, but probably one of the most famous is "By way of deception, thou shalt do war," as it was part of a book title on the group from like the 1990s. This was more than words, though. In some ways, it's been a doctrine that's guided Mossad through decades of complex geopolitical maneuvering, from capturing German National Socialist war criminals, thanks YouTube, to modern-day cyber espionage. Mossad has an almost mythical reputation for protecting Israel's interests through covert means. And this is where I want to address the second elephant in the room: Mossad's mythical reputation. Any intelligence organization will have events that someone is able to make connections to in some way. Their organizations are secretive by nature, and they only trickle out information as they see fit. Most of the time. Sometimes government contractors help with like the forced transparency, but we're not talking about that. Now, while I'm definitely no expert on Mossad, I would argue that Mossad and the CIA are probably seen as the most quote-unquote mythical, and thus seem to have the most elaborate plans either correctly or falsely attributed to them. If you love a good conspiracy theory, start looking at some of the events attributed to Mossad. Just be warned though, it can start getting anti-Semitic or anti-Semitic adjacent pretty fast, which obviously isn't cool. The shadowy play between these two giants, Israel's Mossad and Lebanon's Hezbollah, is part of a larger, darker stage. Iran, a pivotal player in Middle Eastern politics, has cultivated a network of proxies, an axis of resistance, stretching from Lebanon to Yemen. This includes Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and various militias in Iraq and Syria. Now, this web allowed Iran to project power and influence without direct military engagement, a strategy of asymmetric warfare of sorts. I guess the theory here is that Iran can say it wasn't them, but instead a non-state actor carried out these attacks. I've always kind of doubted this approach, as everyone knows who's calling the shots. And here in the year 2025 AD, we have Israel and Iran both lobbing drones and rockets at each other from within their own borders, so not so much trying to be hidden anymore. Back to the proxies. Hezbollah, ever wary of surveillance, had reverted to using pagers for communication, believing them to be beyond the reach of the sophisticated eavesdropping of the IDF, Mossad, and Israel fighting forces. Little did they know, though, those devices were supplied by a company that was, in reality, a Mossad front. Each pager was a ticking bomb, literally. On September 17th, 2024, Beirut was jolted awake by a series of blasts. Hezbollah operatives, from commanders to couriers, found their pagers turning into explosive devices. The city was in chaos. The sound of explosions were punctuated by screams and sirens. This pager attack, as it would come to be known, was not just an assault on Hezbollah, but a testament to Mossad's penetration into the very heart of their adversaries' operations. This attack wasn't just about physical destruction. It was a psychological strike as well, sowing seeds of doubt and fear. This was a PSYOP. It demonstrated Mossad's capability to turn even the most trusted tools against their users, highlighting the lengths of which both sides would go in this silent war. As the smoke cleared, the world watched, wondering how this happened. Blog posts from hardware hackers appeared. I'll link through to some of my favorites on how this could even happen. Pundits and experts, or people, discussed how they thought the operation played out. Global supply chain concerns arose.
Does China make cell phones for Americans?
What if the Tesla batteries exploded and I was locked in the car?
Just some of the concerns I read online. This was not just an incident, it was a narrative of how espionage is conducted in the modern world. Then, 60 Minutes aired an interview that detailed it all. In the late 2010s, a clandestine operation was taking shape within the corridors of Mossad. The operation had a simple premise: to turn everyday communications devices into instruments of chaos. The first target, walkie-talkies. Mossad knew that Hezbollah relied heavily on these devices for their field operations. But how do you weaponize something so innocuous? Enter Michael, a senior Mossad operative who believed in war through deception. And I want to call out the third elephant in the room at this point. All of this is based off of reporting from 60 Minutes. So while I assume it to be true and it sounds plausible, it could all be a Mossad op, someone making this up, something else I didn't come up with off the top of my head. But for what it's worth, I'm rolling with it. The two individuals interviewed by 60 Minutes were recently retired Mossad officers. Michael, obviously not his real name, was a case officer for the organization, and Gabriel, another source close to the pager operation. A quote from Michael would later say, quote, "The walkie-talkie was a weapon, just like a bullet or a missile or a mortar," end quote. The process began more than a decade before the devices were ever set off. Mossad engineers designed and manufactured walkie-talkie batteries and embedded with them explosive devices at a secret facility in Israel. These were not just randomly placed bombs, they were meticulously crafted to fit perfectly in the chest pockets of a tactical vest, next to the heart. And to add injury to insult, Hezbollah paid Mossad for the walkie-talkies. So they got their money and they wounded/killed them. Oof. But planting these deadly tools required sophistication. Mossad couldn't afford to raise any suspicions. They needed to sell these walkie-talkies at a price point that seemed legitimate, not too high to arouse curiosity, but not too low to seem suspiciously attractive. Quote, "We created a pretend world. We are a global production company. We write the screenplay, we're the directors, we're the producers, we're the main actors," Michael said. "And the world is our stage," end quote. So they set up shell companies, fabricated the entire supply chain, and orchestrated deals as if they were seasoned merchants in the electronic market. Hezbollah eventually bought over 16,000 of these rigged devices. But Mossad didn't stop there. They wanted something more personal, something the Hezbollah members would carry around with them at all times. And that's when they turned their attention to pagers, or beepers as I'm more familiar with them being called. Gabriel, another former Mossad agent, explained how they learned that Hezbollah was purchasing pagers from a company called Gold Apollo, a Taiwanese company known for sleek designs and reliable performance. Mossad needed larger pagers to fit the explosives inside, and they ran exhaustive tests with dummies, fine-tuning the amount of powdered explosive so it would harm only the person holding it, but leave those nearby unscathed. Quote, "We test everything, triple, double, multiple times in order to make sure there is minimum damage," Gabriel said, end quote. And I know there's been some war crime discussions around this operation, but I hate to be dismissive, but this is tailored to Hezbollah fighters, and collateral damage isn't criminal. Does it suck? Absolutely. But this isn't like they were booby-trapping children's toys. This is items worn by members of the terrorist group who they're in conflict with. Even details like the pager's ringtone was scrutinized. They needed an urgent sound, compelling enough for someone to retrieve it quickly from their pocket within 7 seconds on average. Now, convincing Hezbollah to adopt these pagers required another layer of deception. Gabriel recalls presenting the idea to Mossad's director at the time. Quote, "And he was furious," Gabriel said. "He was telling us, there's no chance that anyone will buy such a big device. It's not comfortable in their pocket," end quote. But despite the initial skepticism, Gabriel convinced his superiors by highlighting the merits through fake ads and testimonials online. The pagers became so popular that even non-Hezbollah buyers showed interest, though Mossad never sold them outside their intended target. Now, Mossad set up a shell company in Budapest, Hungary, to partner with Gold Apollo, so they could brand their pagers with the company's logo. Mossad went as far as hiring an unsuspecting saleswoman from Gold Apollo who had sold the first batch of pagers and offered Hezbollah an upgrade free of charge. Now, this group had 5,000 pagers at the time of the attack. As suspicions of the pagers started to surface, Mossad made the call at 3:30 p.m. on 17 September 2024 to detonate the devices. Now, pagers across Lebanon went off. The message on the display said they had an encrypted message, and to read it, they would need to press 2 buttons together at the same time. Regardless, if they did it or didn't press the buttons, the devices would explode though. The next day, Mossad activated the walkie-talkies, sometimes killing people who were at the funerals for those killed by the pagers. Official death counts from the incident include 30 people being killed, including 2 children, unfortunately. Around 3,000 were counted as injured. This wasn't mentioned in the reporting from 60 Minutes, but it was sourced from Reuters. But the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon was among those injured by the exploding pagers. The leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, got on state-run television and gave a more subdued speech, which is out of character to say the least, but was probably the result of seeing the beeper and pagers operations up close. Now, as you can imagine, many of those operatives closest to him were likely killed or injured by part of this attack. 10 days later, Israelis launched airstrikes on Hassan Nasrallah's bunker, killing him and an Iranian general. With no leader, a fractured chain of command, and a demoralized fighting force, Hezbollah came to the negotiating table for a ceasefire. With the benefit of hindsight, this attack was only one of many that severely degraded Hezbollah's ability to operate in the region. Israel made it clear that if you want to be the leader of the group, you better ask for a great life insurance policy as part of the benefits plan. Meanwhile, Assad's rule of Syria has also just collapsed, and the Israelis are currently conducting operations against the Houthis in Yemen at the time of this recording. So all of this aside, in my opinion, the level of planning and creativity of this operation gives enemies to Israel something to think about. NSO's groups Pegasus and software like Pegasus, as well as cell phone infrastructure attacks, made smartphones very hostile. Communications in general was very hostile for the adversaries of Israel. Pivoting to lower tech would be a logical choice. Even as Gabriel pointed out in the 60 Minutes interview, the pagers are stupid devices by nature. There's no GPS tracking, there's really no other intelligence gathering capabilities on them. There's also talk of this being more akin to a terrorist attack, which by definition, one could classify this as a terrorist attack evolving into a psychological attack, the survivors being the message. While I'm not fully on board with that, let me expand on it a little bit. The wounded send a bigger message, in my opinion. And I wouldn't say this was the aim of the operation in that it was to maim people and not kill them. I think it's just kind of how it worked out. But having individuals without hands or that are blinded or walking around with limps and colostomy bags sends a message of intimidation from the almost mythical intelligence organization. A day after the pagers, people were afraid to turn on their air conditioners in Lebanon. Going back to semantics, almost any military campaign can be called a terrorist attack if you try hard enough. Most of the time, you're trying to instill fear and penalty into your opponent that they change their minds. I don't want to get hung up on terms here, but I think it's important to highlight some of the differences, especially using some of the facts from this operation. Now, the difference being something along the lines that a terrorist attack uses violence, like exploding pagers, while PSYOPs primarily use information warfare. For example, a 60 Minutes interview for reporting. Spoiler alert, that's where I'm going next if you haven't picked up on it. Now, terrorist attacks aim to create fear through physical action, whereas PSYOPs aim to manipulate perceptions and behaviors through psychological means, less physical violence. This is where I find them to be so interesting, to be honest. Now, terrorist attacks result in immediate physical damage and fear, while PSYOPs seek long-term changes in behavior, thoughts, and allegiance. Hezbollah and enemies of Israel must now reconsider supply chains as well as communications tactics. Well, I bet they also take apart a lot more stuff before they strap it to their bodies. On the same cusp as one leading to another, terrorist attacks are often highly visible and immediate, designed to shock and horrify. Now, PSYOPs, on the other hand, are usually subtle, with effects that might not be immediately observable, but are intended to endure. In summary, while both terrorist attacks and psychological operations can have overlapping effects on public psychology and policy, their methods, intentions, and the nature of their impact differ. One is about direct action and immediate terror. The other is more indirect influence and long-term manipulation. But like I said, one can lead to another. And now that is where I want to pivot with my last point. The 60 Minutes interview itself. This is the PSYOP. And I know this is getting very meta. This interview took place because it was cleared by Mossad. The case officer kind of gave away the plot. Quote, "We create a pretend world. We are a global production company. We write the screenplay. We're the directors. We're the producers. We're the main actors," Michael said. "And the world is our stage." End quote. This isn't an Edward Snowden type of unauthorized leak. Israel is about the size of New Jersey, and I can assure you they know exactly who was involved in those operations and who recently retired from the organization. Mossad knows who Michael and Gabriel are. They could be actors as well. This interview is a message to Hezbollah, Iran, the IRGC, Gaza, Hamas, and really anyone to demonstrate capabilities and ensure the enemies know that they are working on the next thing, making the psychological toll heavy. Paranoid leaders make irrational decisions. This interview itself is the PSYOP. It adds mythos to the Mossad organization. In this line of work, it's nice to post some W's every once in a while to highlight what you're capable of, and you're allowing other speculations to run wild that you're not confirming, especially after the criticisms of Israel intelligence and response post-October 7th. This wasn't really the goal, but it's good advice. So let's go back on what I said earlier, and let's use ATP 222.9 for OSINT, or for those that don't know all the acronyms, Army Technical Procedure 222.9, Open Source Intelligence. I'll link the unlimited distribution one. I think it's from like 2012, but it's great for information and gives some models and frameworks to evaluate and consider open source intelligence. Now, these Army manuals are pretty good, which I suspect is because 3/4 of the people reading them have a hard time staying in the lines with crayons, while the remaining quarter probably just eats the crayons and the paper. Take that, Army. All jokes aside, Section 413 is where we want to live right now. Quote, "When evaluating sources of information to determine the reliability and credibility, consider the identity, who produced the information, for example, a student, teacher, political organization, or a reporter, the authority, how much does this source know about the information, the motive, why was this information published, access, did the source have direct access to the event or information, timelines, what's the date of this information, internal and external consistency, does this information contradict government policies amongst local citizens," end quote. So let's run through this exercise right now. Who produced this information? Well, it's an interview between CBS, 60 Minutes, and Mossad. Authority. How much does the source know? Well, allegedly, they have intimate knowledge, but 60 Minutes didn't verify this according to the reporting. I would assume they followed some sort of source verification, like 2 sources supporting this, but in all honesty, who knows? If it bleeds, it leads, coupled with the need to be first and the dependency of ads, it's kind of relaxed journalistic standards over the years. So we're cautiously confident in these sources being who they say they are, as most spooks aren't going to just out themselves for multiple reasons. Motive. The most important question you should always be asking when evaluating any information: why did they publish this? I've hinted on this a few times in other episodes, but this is probably the most important thing I consider when I'm reading reports or anything like this. In this case, it's to show capabilities, send a message, and save face for the intelligence services of Israel. To some degree, change the October 7 narrative that it was an intelligence failure and restore some of the mythos to Mossad. And this is my belief. It's really important that you're able to separate what you know, i.e., what are facts, and what you believe. I believe these sources are associated with Mossad in some way. Paid actors to tell a story? Maybe. Actually retired agents? Maybe. Retired in air quotes here. Access. Did they have a direct access to the event or information? Yeah, it sounds believable, with the caveat that I'm not a Mossad expert, Israeli expert, or Israeli. The pages they brought did look bigger, and the other evidence did look convincing. Timelines. This event itself is only a few months old, so the timelines appear to mesh fine. I have doubts about the 10 years of the walkie-talkie operation, as it feels like something that would have broken open or something before, But that's not really that important, and maybe I'm just really hard on radios. Lastly, the consistency. The events and information, for the most part, go along with what is known publicly about the operation. Part of that is that because there is little known in general, and the rest is because of the nature of the enemies. By virtue of being an American with American television stations, etc., I'm more likely to see the Jewish-Israeli side of the story than the Hezbollah side. It's just how the world works. One is a terrorist organization and one is a U.S. ally. I'm not weighing in on my opinion of any of this or a position, just highlighting the dynamics here. But I believe they would have similar accounts, judging by the videos online of the damage these pagers did. They were widespread in reporting of this going on. Maybe they have an account of being suspicious about the devices or something, but to be honest, it really doesn't matter. So there, we've processed this OSINT quick and dirty. And from here, we would pivot to a new piece of information, and let's not get carried away here. On the surface, this seems extremely methodical, but once you do it a few times, you usually realize it's the normal way you process new information in some degree. But doing it with a framework hopefully allows you to limit your emotional bias and find blind spots. This operation underscores the intricacies and the multifaceted nature of modern psychological and information warfare, as well as the level of planning and execution needed to carry out these operations successfully. Shell companies, hired actors, social media marketing. Additionally, leveraging tools like pagers and walkie-talkies, mundane objects in everyday life. Mossad turned communications devices into weapons of psychological and physical impact, disrupting Hezbollah's operations and their morale, which arguably assisted in future, more kinetic campaigns. With Hezbollah all jacked up, Hamas is in hiding, the Russians busy with Ukraine, Syria really wasn't in a position to ask for assistance. But there's some scope creep there. The meticulous planning, execution, and narrative manipulation through the 60 Minutes interview reveals the dual operations of this campaign: physical destruction with long-term psychological influence. Now, this case exemplifies the kind of blurred lines that exist between direct action and PsyOp, illustrating how one can lead to another in a continuum of strategic warfare. By sowing distrust in everyday tools and amplifying the mythos of Mossad's capabilities, the operation not only achieves tactical success, but also creates psychological ripples through their enemies and potential enemies that they have to think about. Ultimately, the 60 Minutes interview serves as a strategic message in itself, a calculated move to enhance Mossad's perceived omnipotence while keeping adversaries guessing about what comes next. This interplay of real-world impact and narrative control highlights the evolving nature of psychological operations in modern conflict, where you need to consider that perception can be just as powerful as reality. And that's all I got for the first episode of PsyOps. If you enjoyed this episode or want to hear more about cybersecurity incidents and the threat actors that conduct them, go to IntrusionsInDepth.com. If you've enjoyed this content, or even if you didn't, but you feel a weird sense of obligation, do me a favor and like, share, and review and subscribe. This podcast's growth thus far has been organically driven by listeners like you. It goes a long way to share this with your network. I'm Josh Stepp. Thanks for listening.
This is the Josh Stepp Show. It's not the Stepp Josh Show. This is my favorite show because it's Josh's show. He does what he wants to do. He says what he wants to say with a laugh and a smile. He'll brighten up your day. This is the Josh Stepp Show, not the Stepp Josh Show. Sit back and enjoy the ride.